What if I told you that the worship songs that shaped your youth are making a comeback? And it's not for nostalgia, but for revival. I'm sitting down with Chad Gentry, the heart behind 90s Worship Night, and trust me, you'll want to hear what's coming next. Let's get into it because Kingdom Builder starts right now.
Hi, my name is Lachlan.
And my name's Brooklyn, and we're from Southland.
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is John Wesley.
Hey, Josh Bissell here.
Hey, this is Jamie McDonald.
What's up? I'm Laverdier.
Hey, it's Leah.
And Brandon with Presence Music Band.
What's up, y'all? This is Seth Schleter.
This is Anya Lee.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Bodie, and you're tuned in to Kingdom Builder.
Yes, it's true. And I believe it.
Hey everyone, it's Mike Laxton here with Kingdom Builder. Today I'm excited to sit down with someone who's bringing the heart of 1990s worship music back into the modern moment, but not just for nostalgic covers, but through purpose-driven ministry and a bigger movement that includes live events, albums, and even a docuseries. Please welcome Chad Gentry, founder and president of 90s Worship Night. Chad, it's great to have you here today on Kingdom Builder.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's my privilege to be here.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's definitely an exciting movement I've been hearing about. So we do want to, of course, get into that and a little bit of what that's about. But before we start, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in this process and really what sparked the idea of 90s Worship Night.
Yeah, well, it's really, a process a timeline that goes back about 30 years. So I'll jump back there, then we'll jump to present day. But, back in the 90s, I was a teenager. And around 14, 15 years old is really when I developed an interest in church and in worship music. It kind of, for me, started at Assembly of God denominational youth camp in the summer of 1995. And, through that, me and a few other, kind of members of our youth group, we decided to form a worship band. So in the beginning of 1996, we did just that. We started playing in our Wednesday night, youth group service, leading worship. And it was just such a great time to kind of enter, the modern worship movement, so to speak, because for one, which kind of ties into episode 1 of our 90s Worship Night docuseries, that was the point where Brownsville worship from the Brownsville revival first came on the scene. At the beginning of 1996, those first 2 albums were released that we, reference in the docuseries episode. So those had a profound, impact on our church and, our youth group ministry as well. From there, the Hillsong Shout to the Lord album came out later that year from Integrity Music. We started learning about, what was going on in the UK, with Delirious, the Cutting Edge albums. And, through Brownsville, learned about Vineyard Music and several other, kind of worship movements that were going on and really starting to gain momentum at that point in the decade. So I really had a front row seat to what the Lord did in that back half of the 1990s and was very much involved, leading worship and using, those songs in worship. So kind of fast forward then to, present day in 2020. It was obviously a rough year for, everyone with COVID happening. And my wife and I, we had a rough year just as anyone else did. But that was really compounded in September. Kind of a, very close, friend and pastor of ours named Danny Chambers. He passed away in September 2020. And going back, he was a pivotal figure in the youth worship movement, especially of the late 80s and 90s. And, it was very influential to me as well as those others that I mentioned. But he passed away in September 2020. And I, really wanted to do something to honor, his legacy and memory and just kind of pray a simple prayer to the Lord. I'd love to do something to honor Danny, kind of here I am, send me, that type of prayer that you read about in the Bible. And a few months later, which was December 2020, my wife and I were at a Christmas service leading worship, and pretty well, best way to describe it is I had a divine download of the whole 90s Worship Night concept and what we needed to do, which really caught me off guard because that's not what I was expecting, especially when I prayed that prayer. I was not thinking anything of the such. So we took the next couple weeks, which was the end of 2020. We had a Christmas vacation plan, so we went ahead and attended that. And I did a lot of prayer and just seeking the Lord in that trip about, well, what is this thing, God, that you've kind of laid on my lap here? What's this supposed to be? And, the Lord kind of further revealed the structure of that. So right when we got to January 2021, it was an immediate start to where we're at now. We started capturing content for the docuseries. We got everything, together for NWN Records, which is our record label. And we started kind of thinking through, what could a live event, of this variety look like? So all of that started in January 2021. We soft launched in May of 2023 with our first official live event. It was actually down in Florida, the Orlando area. And then, we hard launched, as I call it, on April 4th of this year, 2025, with the release of episode 1 of 90s Worship Night docuseries.
So it sounds like that Holy Spirit download that you received back in the day, it's probably a lot. I'm assuming that at that point in time, was it this whole multimedia vision that you felt, God telling you to do with the albums, the podcast docuseries, or how did that kind of fit into place? Or was it pretty much, it's like, man, God, this is a lot you want me to do, but okay, and I'll do it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I didn't realize it was as extensive as what it's become. I kind of make the joke, had I known that at the start, it may have been a little harder to say yes to the Lord on all of this, but because it's definitely required blood, sweat, and tears, life savings, things of that nature. But I knew that, a documentary, portion of what we're doing was probably going to be the tip of the spear, which, my immediate reaction to that was, well, God, I'm not a filmmaker, never produced any films. Yes, I mean, I've been involved with music and, made albums and things of that nature, through the years. But my extent of film knowledge was doing music videos, and being involved with that process. So, kind of had to learn on the fly, and I just, prayed to God. I was like, hey, if we're going to do this, is going to be successful. You're going to have to send the right people on my path. And, fortunately, I've connected with some amazing videographers, some local to, where we're at, Middle Tennessee. And then, some of the interviews that we've captured have been in places far and wide. Some of them, I've been able to travel to with a videographer to do an in-person interview, but most of them, we just got a local videographer to show up at whoever we're interviews, house, and we'll just jump on a Zoom call and kind of do the interview remotely. So finding all those people, and then the editors as well. My series editor, his name is Eric Staples, but he's just a fantastic, editor, and he works on some pretty big projects. So. He and I crossed paths, and we talked about this project, and he's been such a blessing. So yeah, God knew what He was doing. I definitely did not, but all that I did was had faith, and made the step forward. So
I definitely do want to dive into the docuseries a little bit more in just in a few moments, but with 90s Worship Night, you're not just recreating 90s worship music. You're using it as a ministry tool for spiritual reconnection. How would you define that heart or mission behind 90s Worship Night?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's really, I guess the first, objective is to really reach out to, the people just like myself who were involved in ministry and going to church in that decade of the 1990s. And for some, it's a very nostalgic, kind of intersection to where, they have fond memories, and, it really encourages them in their faith. And then others, let's just be honest, they're not, probably where they want to be with their relationship with the Lord, or maybe they're looking back and, they've had church hurt or some other stumbling blocks that unfortunately came into their path, during the 1990s. So, we've gotten a lot of, testimony, type emails with people, kind of sharing that, very thing that, at least this first episode, it's really made them take a minute and kind of, rethink, reflect on, their experience, during that time period. And I think it's brought healing in some cases. So that's definitely a big part of it. I think another part is the educational aspect, in that we're really wanting to, kind of share, through anecdotal examples of, just what worship ministry was like back then, how it was different than what it is today. And I think a large conversation is, well, how did it get from where it was then to what it is today? Which is a fascinating discussion. So, we've had a lot of like millennial age, kind of young worship leaders, reach out and want to have conversations about that. So there's that aspect. And then, too, obviously there's the, just the honoring, part of this, where just really wanting to pay tribute, pay homage to the worship leaders, the songwriters, just the different movements of God, and really a celebration, of what the Lord did in that time period.
Now, I know you did kind of touch on a little bit about as far as, the 90s worship movement, of course, to today. What do you think, as someone who's kind of curating this movement, what do you think the 90s worship songs got right that today's worship music may be missing or doing differently?
Yeah, well, and I think, I'm always quick to say, I don't think people have ever been different or changed. I think it's just always been the resources and the circumstances surrounding people that have changed, all through the ages. I always make the joke is like, hey, if they'd had PA systems and electricity, back in the time of Christ, I'm sure they'd be doing a lot of the same things that we're doing today. It just, they were limited to what their technology was, and kind of what culture was at that point in time. Same as what we've experienced, and definitely in the 20th century, in that in the 1990s, you kind of had, we were doing well with, PA systems and kind of some of the live performance aspects, but we did not have the computer technology, obviously, not the hardware, nor, was the internet in place. So you take a look, first of all, like with Brownsville, episode 1, talking about the revival, it's like they had no lyrics up on any walls, during the revival, which is hard to believe, especially, looking at, how things have been the last 20 years, with how we've done church, since then. So that's one thing. I mean, they weren't using, click tracks or stem packages, back then. Obviously, it just didn't exist. Maybe your drummer was, using a click track to, keep tempo. But other than that, it was just all, live playing. There was no digital recording yet. So it was all, kind of, for anyone who get a laugh out of this, that was kind of the ADAT era, which was, they used tapes. They were basically VCR tapes that you recorded music on, but you had to have a special system, to record. And, there were all these, huge analog, boards and these broadcast trucks that they'd have to, bring in to do a live album. So, I mean, very, very much more difficult to do a live album back then compared to now. I mean, it's just the technology's so much more readily available. So there were a lot of challenges, to do worship music back then. And because of that, I mean, it really had not, reached a commercial application, at that point in time. I mean, everyone, and I can say this because I lived through that time period, is that everyone who was involved with it, I mean, they really looked at it as ministry. Like if you were going to get into, being a worship leader, doing worship music, that was, pretty well considered ministry. Like you recognize that you weren't, going into the CCM genre, you weren't an entertainer. Like it was something completely different. And I think, in the years since, obviously that has changed. And now the biggest, arguably the biggest percentage of CCM is the worship genre, which I would have never in a million years believed that, back 25 years ago. But, just, how movements shift. And again, like I said, technology increased. Because, I mean, really, prior to the internet, I mean, and again, that's one of the reasons why Brownsville and the revival was so important, was because it kind of served as a distribution mechanism to a lot of the really great 1990s era songs, because they were covering those songs at the revival. People were coming into the revival from the four corners of the earth, so they were taking, VHS tapes of the revival services. They were buying, CDs and songbooks out in the lobby, and they were going back and doing those songs in their churches. So it kind of almost served as a YouTube of a pre-internet, age, which is very, very fascinating. So I think the technology is the main reason why things were different back then compared to today. As far as the songwriting is concerned, the main difference was because there was not a commercial application to it necessarily back then. Probably 80% or so of the songs just had one songwriter, and it was basically just someone writing a song out of an experience they had with God, or a burden that they had, or just a desire to really write a song that would, help the local body that they were serving at. And from that time, to today, now it's, songwriting is get 5 or 6 people in a writer's room, that the publishing companies have sponsored, probably somewhere either, in Nashville or one at the mega churches, who have a major music ministry attached to them. So that's how the songwriting is different. Not to say one's better or worse than the other. It's just different.
I just love that you are touching on, that 90s movement, especially you mentioned Brownsville, just because, again, with worship music being a huge part of what we hear, not on just on radio, but just, generally speaking, you look at some of those big groups out there now. I'm just thinking of a couple, Elevation, you've got, Hillsong is still around to some degree, you've got different, it's become such a big part of our, for anyone who listens to consume Christian music, they're going to have run across at least some sort of, worship band or have a favorite. And I think it's cool that you're kind of touched on that. And, and then you've gone to the point of making a docuseries, which, I think you're on the right track because, right now, episode 1 being 6 weeks out, you're creeping on 80,000 views at the moment. So it's a pretty awesome thing that God's doing there, and what he's looking at as far as what you have coming. So speaking on the docuseries, obviously a brilliant concept. What other stories and themes are we looking forward to in the future of this series as we kind of go down the road with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, kind of going back to what I was saying about, end of 2020 into 2021 when we started 90s Worship Night, I really felt strongly at that time, that this, could be a 100 million view series, with all the episodes together, and that would be worldwide. So with that, kind of in mind, we launched episode 1 and wanted to kind of see just out of the gates organically, how's it going to do? And we've really been blown away at, just how, the common person, so to speak, has went to social media and shared the links and given testimonies about it. I figured that would happen to some extent, but it's been way more than what, I imagined for sure. And we've already seen it, take root. Like I'm having conversations. Actually, got a call next week from probably who's going to be our new ambassador from the country of Brazil, down in South America. But I think we're going to try to go down to Brazil and do, some events next year, which I figure eventually we would do some of those things, but that's been happening a lot quicker. We're having similar conversations in the Philippines, in the UK. So we're already seeing, an international audience appear with us, and, we're going to start some, more ad campaigns. I know we've already done some PR on it, obviously, and appreciate you so graciously for covering it as well. But, we're just getting started. I felt like, it was really the leading of the Holy Spirit that we started with the Brownsville revival, because as I was saying earlier, it's kind of a microcosm of the whole decade, because, it was kind of an aggregator of popular worship songs out to the masses. So that's episode 1. I will announce on here. We have not publicly announced yet, which we will do soon. But episode 2 is going to be about Darlene Check and what the Lord did over in Australia during the 1990s. So really excited about that episode. We're finishing it up, hoping to have that out. At the moment, don't hold me to this audience, but early October is what we're planning for that. So that'll be episode 2. Still kind of praying through the sequence of what the other ones will be, and obviously we have a lot of fundraising to do. Which we'll talk about our websites here in a minute, but I'll tell you what some of the other episodes will be. There will be one on Martin Smith and, kind of his experience with Delirious and the ministry in the UK, during the 90s. There will be one, which will be kind of the origin story of Hosanna Music, with Integrity Music. Don Moen probably being the main figure of that, but we'll have Paul Baloche, Paul Wilbur, Lenny LeBlanc, some of those folks in that episode. We're going to have one episode about kind of featuring Ron Canoli in multicultural worship, which that'll kind of go hand in hand, I think, with the Hosanna music episode. We'll have one about the origin story of Vineyard, with John Wimber and just all the incredible worship leaders who were part of, the Vineyard movement, especially in the 1990s when it, reached critical mass. Being like, Andy Park, David Roos, Brian Dirksen, Rita Springer is going to have a big role in that episode. Brenton Brown, good friend of ours, he'll be in that episode too. We'll have one about Jeff Dio and, kind of the origin story of Sonic Flood in the early days of Goatee Records. So really excited about that episode. Jeff's been a huge, friend and partner with 90s Worship Night. And then we'll have an episode about the early days of the Passion Movement, kind of leading into the big one-day live event that really was a game changer. Pretty well that was the event that shifted 90s worship into 2000s worship that happened the summer of 2000. So we've got, Christy Knuckles and Nathan Knuckles, Charlie Hall, Chris Tomlin, those folks being a central part of that episode. So really, really excited, about the future episodes. It's going to be a lot of man hours to, get those ready for distribution, but we think that they'll definitely reach their own audience. And then I think as a series, folks will want to watch all the episodes is what our prayer is.
I was going to say, I think for me personally, the Jeff Dio one will be is the one I'm looking forward to the most, just because Sonic Flood was, for me, really getting into the worship scene in the late 90s, early 2000s. I Can Sing of Your Love Forever is the one song that resonated with me with the most. So I'm super excited about that one. And just really, just the whole idea of really kind of drawing the history of worship music from the 90s to today. I think it's really a cool opportunity to really showcase that for the global audience. And who knows what will happen from that. I mean, obviously God's got a plan in mind with that. But of course, you've got the Docuseries. You're also putting out music under 90s Worship Night. I know you recently released a song, History Maker, with Yancy, and very powerful reimagining there. Any particular reason why that song was chosen, and Yancy in particular as well, to help with that?
Yeah, well, I'll start first by just saying, last spring, which spring of 2024, we released our first studio compilation album called Break Through the Stars, which, Jeff Dio was one of the main, features of that album, and had several other wonderful features. Charlie Hall did a great, version of Give Us Clean Hands, and Brenton Brown was on there. Linda Cooley did a new version, More Your Glory. Really excited about that. It's a wonderful album. So, kind of ending 2024, we started, really thinking, what could be a good follow-up, compilation album to what we did with Break Through the Stars, which mainly for, stuff we'll be releasing later this year and kind of culminating into 2026. So my wife and I, we started, just talking about possibilities. And we just really Lord had laid it on our hearts to reach out to Yancy, and we didn't really know her prior to reaching out, but just to be a part of this next phase, this next album, and to basically collaborate with us on a single. So we met with her towards the end of last year, and kind of put the ball in her court as far as what song that she would want to cover from what I call the 90s worship catalog, being kind of that probably list of close to 100 songs that would be the most popular or well known from that decade. And she chose History Maker just because of what that song kind of meant to her back in that time period. And also anyone who's heard her music knows that she knows how to rock, which that song gave her a wonderful opportunity to do so. So we started recording it, basically in January of this year, and released it in March. So that's kind of the first single of what will be, this next studio compilation album. Don't have a name for the album yet, but I can tell you, we'll, obviously have that song, and then you'll be excited, Mike. The next single is going to be the 25th anniversary duet between Jeff Dio and Lisa from Out of Eden of I Could See of Your Love Forever, that we actually captured live last August at our 90s Worship Night live event at World Stage Theater at Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., which there'll be a whole live album coming out later this year, from that event. But we're going ahead and doing kind of like a radio single of I Could See of Your Love Forever, and that'll be, the second single from what will be the studio compilation album.
I can't believe you mentioned 25 years ago. I can't believe it's 25 years ago that song came out.
It's 25 years ago.
Well, that song.
Well, and what's so crazy is, just through the process, meeting Jeff Dio and meeting Lisa and filming the interviews, I had realized that since they had, it's kind of a trivia thing, but Sonic Flood, the first album is what had the studio version of I Could See Your Love Forever that just blew up on Christian radio, all across the country. But they recorded a live album called Sonic Praise that didn't actually come out until after, Jeff had left the band. But they had recorded a live version of I Could See Your Love Forever, and Lisa joined him on stage to do that. That was the last time they had, I think, even seen each other since then, let alone had sung together. So reuniting them, last August to do it, it was, as a fan, Mike, you would appreciate this. It was pretty, it was just so ironic and amazing to kind of see that unfold. Just to kind of see their reactions of like, wow, we haven't done this for 25 years. This is pretty special. And Lisa, even she made the joke. She's like, wow, that I don't remember that key change being as difficult as what it is, So that was pretty humorous, but it's a great version. We're going to hopefully release that. It'll be sometime in July, probably mid-July. We'll get that single out on digital and so forth. So really excited about that.
I'm very excited about that too. I think that's, like I said, that's what I resonate with the most, and looking forward to that. So, I mean, along those lines, worship itself can be very deeply personal. Has there been a particular moment, whether maybe a live event or after the release of the docuseries, or just through this process, where someone has shared a story with you that's kind of reminded you why you do this?
Yeah, I don't want to get into too many details on this particular story, just because it's someone that I know, and it was kind of personal what they shared. But it was kind of what I was alluding to earlier. Someone who'd kind of become really disillusioned, with some of the bad actors of that era, and some negative things that they experienced and that they had seen, and then them just watching, episode 1 and, hearing Lyndall's story and just, how God honoring Lyndall was with his ministry. I don't want to give anything away, but folks need to watch the episode. You'll understand what I'm referencing once you watch it. But that really, Mike, my friend who saw that, he said it really brought a lot of healing, to him spiritually, because he was involved, with the revival and had been to School of Ministry down there. And, that kind of reminded him, like, hey, not everyone, down there is a bad guy, and God did a lot of wonderful things. I mean, of course, with anything, there's going to be bad actors, and, there's going to be people who have selfish agendas. But through that, I mean, you can see the hand of the Lord and the Holy Spirit, working throughout the ages. And I think, anyone who watches the episode will be like, oh, wow, yeah, I could definitely see where God moved in these situations.
Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, what would you think would be the bottom line message you would want people to take away from all this, from the music, the events, the docuseries, just the movement as a whole? What would you want them to take away?
Yeah, well, I really wanted to, stir a fire. I think that's the best, simplest way to put it, and even with us, titling the first episode, Revival, Fire, Fall, from the Paul Baloche song that was popularized during the Brownsville Revival. We really want to stir a fire. And I think that goes in two directions. Is one, just to get people excited about, doing church again, having church services, assembling together, getting all the saints together in fellowship, so to speak. I there was a passion back then, and anyone who was involved in the 90s especially if you were in, kind of in the charismatic movement, like I was, man, there was always an expectancy and a joy of just coming together, and worshiping the Lord and just being together. And I think that's kind of dulled, unfortunately since then. I think we're starting to see it come back now, which is really exciting. And I think that's kind of why God had the timing of all this happening when it has. So there's definitely, that aspect of it that we want folks to take away and be inspired. And I think the other side of it is we just want people to have discourse, have civil discourse, but just discussion. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? I think one of the major issues that we have, today, I mean, it's always been an issue in the church, but I think it's been proliferated, probably because of the internet and social influencing, is we probably have the worst theology out there that we've ever had, in the evangelical world. I mean, it's amazing how off the wall some of that has gotten, and we really need to steer that back to a biblical foundation. And I think projects, hopefully like our docuseries and just movement as a whole, can help facilitate, some of those discussions. Because at the end of the day, Mike, I mean, if you're wanting to have revival, it's got to start with repentance and getting back to the Word of God. That's what revival is. I think, unfortunately, one of the negative things from the 90s is we kind of looked at revival as a supernatural manifestation, which, I mean, definitely, that could be a component of it. And, I myself have had supernatural experiences, so not downplaying that, but that's not the core. I mean, the core needs to be, the repentance and the return to, to the Bible.
And, you mentioned that, you believe that. I think you're right as far as the timing goes. Just, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of, worship groups over the last few months, and just hearing their hearts and hearing where they're just doing in the local churches and just where things are going. And just even from my standpoint, I have a passion for youth ministry. And so I'm a youth leader at my church, and just seeing some of these youth, what they're doing and what they're like on their own, that like God's working through them in radical ways. Like, I've not really, I've been pretty much a Christian my whole life, and it's like I've not seen it to this extent. Again, maybe I'm just hypersensitive because I see this. I kind of live and breathe the music space, but I think it's definitely the timing it seems to be appropriate for what's going on. And again, I'm super excited to see the future episodes of what comes out of the docuseries, just to see where God has plans for you, Chad. And I mean, thank you again for just being with us, sharing your heart and the story behind this incredible work you're doing, and really kind of breathing a new life into timeless worship. Of course, for those watching and listening, we'll have lyrics to the links to the docuseries, as well as the song History Maker. And then, of course, as you have more episodes come out, we'll help as much as we can to help push those as well. And maybe even have you on again once we get through other episodes. Maybe we'll have to do a deep dive into each episode and kind of, work that. That would be kind of cool to kind of.
I could definitely have Jeff Dio join me next time as well. Because I know he would love to talk with you and share some stories. Because that's one of the things I love about Jeff, Mike, is just he was kind of like he really he kind of became the cover man for 90s worship. Just with what they did in Sonic Flood. They were doing all the hits. And they brought several of those, as you well know, to Christian radio, which had never been done before with worship music prior to Sonic Flood doing that in 1999. So we definitely have him on. And thank you again, just so much for helping to shine a light on this project and what we're doing. And just definitely, as I was saying earlier, want to invite, the audience to, check out our website, 90sworshipnight.com. We've got all the pertinent links there. Definitely, if you want to help us in our endeavor, it's very, very difficult, to do post-production at the magnitude that we are. So we do have a crowdfunding campaign that's set up. You can link to it from our website. And obviously, going to our merch store and, picking up some of our really cool Cross Hands t-shirts, that helps as well. So.
Well, again, thank you so much for your time, Chad. We really do appreciate you spending some time with us here on Kingdom Builder. And we'll definitely talk to you here again soon.
Sounds great, my friend. To God be the glory. Thank you so much, Mike.
Now, hey, friends, if you like this conversation, don't forget to like, share, and comment so you don't miss what's next. And check those links out in the description so you get more details on Chad, 90s Worship Night, as well as the incredible music and docuseries. And until next time, this is Mike Laxton reminding you to keep Christ first in your lives, and everything else will fall into place.